Good evening. This month I want to dedicate it to mostly just American vehicles, and it is the 250th anniversary of America's founding. Although it was technically on July 3rd, it was signed to be the July 4th. But that's not for this video, and it is an interesting topic to go into. But again, not this video. Today, you might be seeing it from the title of the video, from AI overview, even though I don't fully support AI, or the thumbnail of the video. Depending on however you see it, you might know that this video is about the best vehicle of World War II, technically, that more or less won the war, because without it, we really wouldn't have been able to go far. History often remembers the weapons that won the wars. The Sherman tank, known for how reliable it is and how quickly we pump them out, or the P-51 Mustang, and the fact that it was one of the best fighters of the war, or the B-17 Flying Fortresses, their defensive capabilities, their payloads, and how many of them were just built entirely, as well as the most famous Iowa-class battleships. Yet, one of the most important machines of World War II didn't really carry guns on its own, didn't fire torpedoes, and didn't possess much of any armor. It was mostly constructed of plywood and powered by a singular diesel engine. It looked more like a workboat than a weapon of war. But without it, many historians argue that the Allied invasion of Europe and the Pacific could never have succeeded. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, once remarked, "Andrew Higgins is the man that won the war for us. If Higgins had not designed and built these LCVPs, we never could have landed over an open beach. The whole strategy of the war would have been different." It was truly remarkable praise, especially from Dwight D. Eisenhower of all people, who even criticized Oppenheimer for the fact that Oppenheimer felt responsible for the deaths of the Japanese. Millions of Allied soldiers would cross onto beaches aboard this one simple vessel. The landing craft was known as the Landing Craft Vehicle and Personnel, or the Higgins boat. Over 23,000 of these things would be built during World War II, and they would participate in almost every battle imaginable where amphibious assault had to be conducted by the United States and even our allies. From the deserts of North Africa to the famous Normandy beaches, and even hundreds into thousands of miles away in the Pacific Islands. The Higgins boat became the vehicle that carried the Allied advance across the globe. And it is absolutely understated how good these vehicles are. Most media just depicts them carrying people, which is what they were good at, but not truly all of the places they showed up. Long before the war had even begun, military planners recognized one uncomfortable truth. Invading a coastline was one of the most dangerous military operations imaginable. Throughout histories, armies had crossed rivers, mountains, and even deserts, but crossing an ocean and then fighting immediately upon arrival was an entirely different challenge. In previous wars, soldiers typically disembarked from transport ships into small wooden boats. Then these boats would be rowed towards a shoreline where troops had to climb over the sides of them into the shallow water, where they would then have to organize themselves before attacking inland. The process would be painfully slow at times. Every second spent climbing over a boat's side would increase the exposure to enemy fire. Heavy equipment often sank beneath the surface or couldn't even be really carried across. Artillery would take much longer to get to where it needed to be, as it either needed larger vehicles or had to be small artillery, which even then, something like a mortar, would take a while to get to position. And if the weather became worse, or the waves were too rough, an entire landing operation would just collapse into chaos. One of these chaotic events, which would be remarked as the changing point for most of British doctrine, would be Gallipoli. The First World War really was the time which warfare changed for a lot of countries. In 1915, Allied forces, mainly the British, attempted to seize the Dardanelles by landing troops on the Gallipoli Peninsula. The invasion quickly became a catastrophe, with landing boats becoming trapped, troops being pinned down on the narrow beaches, supplies failing to arrive, and due to the openness of the beaches of where they landed, or the funneling that the British troops had to endure, thousands would be quickly killed. Military observers around the world studied Gallipoli carefully. One conclusion became increasingly obvious, and it was that future amphibious invasions had to have entirely new equipment made for it. Even Churchill, up until Normandy landings, would be very suspicious of a landing operation because of Gallipoli. One thing at a time changed. So we won the landings of Normandy, and he was even impressed. But we'll get to some of that. During the 1920s and the 1930s, the United States Marine Corps faced a strategic question. If war came with Japan, how would America even cross thousands of miles of ocean and then seize these heavily defended islands? Unlike Europe, the Pacific contained relatively few major ports. Most of the islands possessed nothing more than narrow beaches surrounded by hundreds of coral reefs, which were just strong enough that they could even damage older landing craft to the point of sinking. And if these transport ships even could reach them, they couldn't just simply dock. Everything would have to be loaded offshore, whether it be troops, trucks, artillery, food, fuel, medical supplies, construction equipment, anything. It would all have to be done on the shoreline very slowly and very carefully, where they would be open and exposed to enemy fire. And the Marine Corps began to develop what became known as amphibious warfare doctrine. This doctrine envisioned specialized ships transporting assault forces across the ocean before launching smaller landing craft that would then carry these troops, supplies, or vehicles straight onto hostile beaches. But there was one major problem. There was no landing craft that existed to do this. Throughout the early 30s, both the Navy and the Marine Corps evaluated numerous civilian boats. Most failed pretty much immediately. Many possessed deep drafts that prevented them from reaching shallow beaches, while others lacked sufficient cargo capacity. Some even became stuck when they became grounded. Others damaged their propellers on sandbars, or even had their rudders break. The Marines established a list of essential requirements. The ideal landing craft needed to be able to carry an entire infantry platoon, transport light vehicles, operate in extremely shallow water, beach itself safely, be able to back out of the beach without assistance, survive repeated landings, operate reliably in rough surf, and be simple enough for mass production. The challenge appeared enormous. Ironically, the answer was already operating in the swamps of Louisiana. Andrew Jackson Higgins was born in Nebraska in 1886. Unlike many famous industrialists of his era, Higgins possessed little formal engineering education. Instead, he learned through experience. He worked in the lumber industry. He operated boats, and he solved practical problems through experimentation rather than theory. Eventually, he relocated to New Orleans, Louisiana, where waterways were dominated by both commerce and daily life. Here, Higgins founded Higgins Industries, a small company specializing in rugged workboats. His customers weren't navies. They were just typically oil companies, loggers, surveyors, or even just the commercial fishermen. Their boats needed to navigate places conventional vessels could not. Louisiana's marshes presented unique challenges, where the waterways constantly shifted, mudflats appeared without any warning, and submerged logs could destroy propellers. Conventional boats frequently became trapped in these environments. Higgins believed boats should not work with nature and not fight against it. During the early 1930s, Higgins introduced a revolutionary shallow draft workboat simply known as Eureka. At first glance, it appeared unremarkable, but beneath its hull lay several ingenious engineering solutions. Its most important innovation was a tunnel stir. Instead of allowing the propeller to extend below the hull, the tunnel partially enclosed it. This offered several advantages, where the propeller became protected from submerged obstacles. The rudder was less likely to strike sandbars, and the boat could safely operate in waters barely deep enough to float. Most importantly, if the boat became grounded, it could often reverse on its own. This capability impressed everyone who witnessed it. Conventional boats stranded on beaches usually required outside assistance, but the Eureka often simply backed out of it. The word of these boats quickly spread. Oil companies appreciated its durability, loggers valued the cargo capacity, commercial operators praised its reliability. Before long, Higgin's small company had earned a reputation for building some of the toughest shallow water boats in America. None of this had anything to do with military contracts. Andrew Higgin simply wanted to solve practical problems. But as international tensions increased throughout the 30s, military observers began to pay attention. One of these observers was the United States Marine Corps. Marine officers searching for landing crafts noticed Higgin's unusual workbook. Unlike other civilian vessels, the Eureka had already possessed nearly every characteristic they desired. The Marines invited Higgins to demonstrate his design. He eagerly accepted the offer. Few realized that his simple demonstration would eventually reshape amphibious warfare around the world. Throughout the late 30s, the Navy and Marine Corps organized increasingly realistic landing exercises, known as the Fleet Landing Exercises. These annual maneuvers tested new equipment and refined amphibious tactics. Among the participants was Andrew Higgins. His Eureka boat quickly distinguished itself. During repeated demonstrations, it consistently outperformed competing designs. Observers noted its remarkable ability to approach beaches that stopped other boats. After unloading cargo, it could just simply reverse into the deep water and return for another load. Competing designs often became stranded, and the Eureka did not. Marine officers would be very impressed, yet they still identified one serious flaw. If it had to carry troops, they had to climb over the sides, and directly in combat, those precious extra seconds could mean hundreds of casualties. A better solution was needed. Ironically, the inspiration would come from America's future enemy. During the Second Sino-Japanese War, American military observers watched Japanese amphibious operations in China. One detail immediately stuck out. Japanese landing craft featured a large ramp built directly into the bow. Instead of climbing over the sides, soldiers would simply run straight forward onto the beach. The concept was brilliantly simple. One Marine officer reportedly returned with photographs of the Japanese design and showed them to Andrew Higgins. Higgins would even study them as carefully as he can, with a response following up, "I can build that." And so he did.